Hi everyone, welcome to our session on the social impact on connected kids and creating healthy habits. My name is Shannon Jones. I will be moderating our discussion today. We have three world-leading experts in the area of kids and their use of digital devices, technology, and I'm so excited for this discussion. We will hopefully be able to give parents lots of great practical tips and advice and insights on the way that their kids are interacting with technology. Let me start by introducing our panelists for today. We have Dr. Jo Orlando, who is a leading international expert on family and digital lifestyle. Her cutting-edge insights and practical solutions support children and families to confidently manage today's most pressing digital wellbeing issues. She is the founder of Tech Clever, a digital literacy education program used in schools worldwide that supports schools and parents in managing the stress and uncertainty that children's technology use can bring. So we're very lucky to have her. Welcome, Jo.
Thanks, Shannon.
And we've got Maya Thiagarajan, who is a global educator, author, and thought leader on education policy. She's taught at schools in the USA, Singapore, and India, and recently published the book Beyond the Tiger Mum, East-West Parenting for the Global Age, which offers practical advice for parents based on extensive research in child development. And I look forward to hearing some of your insights based on research from the book. Welcome, Maya.
Thank you.
And Sun Lim is the Professor of Communications and Technology and the Dean of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences at Singapore University of Technology and Design. She studies the social impact of technology on kids and families and has published widely in leading international journals. And she also recently published a book called Transcendent Parenting, Raising Children in the Digital Age. Welcome, Sun.
Thank you.
So I thought we might start off by perhaps talking about some of our own technology use, because technology in the family, it's parents as well as kids, and it's our dynamic with technology that kids are modelling and they see in front of us. So perhaps let's start with some confessions. How about you ladies tell me about a technology habit that you have, perhaps one of your worst technology habits or something that you're working on in your own healthy habits relating to technology. Jo?
Okay, so I study how children use technology, but I also have my own children. So this is probably what they would say, that I often, like now, I've got my phone on silent, so I'm not disturbed, but then I'll leave it on silent for a long time. So people are messaging me or trying to catch me, I won't hear it, and that seems to annoy a lot of people. So that is an absolute confession. I'm supposed to have it all together, but none of us has got it all together when it comes to technology.
What about you, Maya?
Well, like Jo, I also have my own kids, and I think it's so much easier sometimes to work with other people and their kids than with your own. I think my confession is sometimes when my kids are trying to talk to me, particularly in the evening, and I'm checking my phone, and I keep telling myself I have to stop doing that. If they're talking, I have to just engage completely. But sometimes that phone temptation is strong. So that's one of the things I'm working on.
I think we all are on that one. What about you, Sun?
So my worst habit is I will turn on my phone with an express purpose to do something, but then once I go into it, I see all these other notifications and interesting pings, and I get completely waylaid and I forget what I was turning on the phone to do in the first place, and that takes a full half hour before I wake out of that, to that realization.
Yeah, I think we definitely all do that. And I have screen reminders, I think, using the apps in my phone to try and tell me, hey, are you aware you've gone down this rabbit hole? Which is a very helpful thing for that habit, I find as well. So the format for today's session, we're going to have a quick discussion with each of our panelists, and then we'll be following up with a live Q&A towards the end of the session. So please, participants, if you have a question or there's something that you'd like us to ask one of our experts, please drop those into the Q&A section on the screen, and I'll be keeping an eye on those, and we'll be answering questions towards the end of the session. Let's start with you, Jo. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do with Tech Clever and some of the themes that you hear a lot from parents around the issues and trends to do with kids and their use of technology.
Yeah, so I speak in a lot of countries and I do research in a lot of countries, and there seems to be particular kinds of stress points that parents are trying to manage in terms of getting their children to have healthy technology relationships. And I'm finding technology can cause a lot of stress in the home, particularly children's technology use, and parents really are very lost sometimes on the best ways to manage it. So sometimes those things are around safety, and we know there's a lot of information around online safety, but it also can be things like how to manage screen time, particularly if you're, well, I was going to say particularly if your children are younger, but that's not the case. It's all ages. How do you help the children to have some time on technology and use it really well, but to also balance that with time off technology and doing other kinds of interests? And also in around 80% of households, parents and children fight, have arguments almost every day around technology use. So it could be around getting the child off. It could be the parents don't know what the child is doing online, so they feel very stressed and anxious about that. It could be that they've got contacts and they're not sure who they are. It could be that they're video gaming too much and they're worried about their social skills, all those kinds of issues. So I developed a course called Tech Clever, which is based on all my research, hundreds and hundreds of families, which focuses on each of these really stressful aspects of children's technology use that parents are trying to deal with, and helping parents to explain why they're occurring and then the best ways that they can manage it. So lots of really good practical tips. And I find that parents use this program for themselves. Schools, use the program within the schools to educate children, to educate the parents. So it's about creating healthy technology relationships. So we've been using technology for a while, and we are finding that we're kind of going around in circles in terms of how we deal with these issues. So I developed this course as a new way of dealing with these issues that's really meaningful for today's children and how they use technology.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you mentioned there is that technology often creates a lot of stress and perhaps conflict in households. And I know some parents often use technology as a way of managing behaviour. So perhaps there might be conflict there, and one of the punishments might be confiscating technology and things like that. What are your thoughts on that as a part of developing the relationship with technology? So confiscating, using technology as a punishment, are there good and bad sides to that? What should parents be doing with that?
Yeah, there are. It's become a very common parenting strategy. If you've got a 14-year-old at home, or a child who loves technology, and there is a behaviour issue, often parents will take their phone off them. Normally it's their phone because that's their favourite device. Take it off them as a punishment. And later stats show that happens in about 75% of family homes. So it works in the short term. We know that, a child will feel, that you've taken their mobile phone off them, and it will work, from a parent's point of view. They will definitely pay attention, and react. And sometimes parents just need that, that kind of recognition that the child is listening, and if the phone's taken off them, they get that. But it works in the short term, okay? But it's the long term now that we really need to think about. So long term, we want to create healthy habits, and we want to create strong parent-child relationships. So in my research with a lot of teenagers and a lot of older children, what I found in these many, many interviews I've had with them is how children think about, having their phone taken off them as a punishment. So, I came across some really interesting and quite disturbing findings from my research, in that, one, it might work in the short term, but in the long term, what children tend to tell me is that it really strains the parent-child relationship. And this is how it works. I'll explain how one child explained it to me. So a 14-year-old, she said, now, my mum just takes my phone off me all the time. It doesn't matter what I do, if I'm late from school, if I haven't put the dishes away, haven't done my job, I talked back to her, she'll just take the phone off me. That's the instant way that she manages my behaviour. So she said, what I do now is I really just don't tell my mum as much anymore, because I don't want to risk having my phone taken off me. So that is a massive issue. One, in terms of, safety. If a child gets into, into hot water online or offline, they're going to worry about telling their parent because they don't want to have their phone taken off them. So safety is a massive issue. And two, if a child is pulling back from the parent and not really telling them so much because of fear of having their phone taken off them, then that is a huge issue in terms of the parent-child relationship today, next month, next year, in 5 years' time. It becomes a pattern that the child falls into of just really not disclosing much about their life at all. So in the short term, yes, it works, but in the long term, it's really potentially quite damaging. So in terms of how you do this, how do you manage a child, if that's the only thing that works? Well, right, my recommendation with that is if it's a technology-related issue, so they've done something that is just not, is a behaviour issue in terms of being online or using their device, then yes, taking their device off them in that case is warranted because it kind of matches the misbehaviour that you're directing. But, if they haven't done well at exams or it's another issue, a non-technology related issue, then other parenting strategies need to come into play that don't involve the phone. They should match whatever the behaviour issue is then. So that way the phone doesn't become this bargaining piece that gets between you and your child.
And in terms of healthier habits that parents can develop with their children, would you have some best practices then around the ways that parents are communicating with their children, or some of the tips and rules around how they are managing behaviour or just managing use of their children's phone in general?
Yeah, I think one of the issues that I see, so I go into a lot of homes and I talk to the parents and I talk to the children as part of my research, and I get a feel for what family life is like. And what I find in most homes is there's not actually a lot of talk around the child's technology use and the parent's technology use. The main talk seems to be about, well, it's time to get off, or I don't like you being on that phone all the time. It's quite negative, but not a lot of talk about what the child actually does on there, sharing interests online, sharing your own interests online as a parent, showing a funny video or, playing a video game with your child. There doesn't seem to be a lot of talk or a lot of kind of sharing of things online. So you might take your child to soccer and you watch so much soccer practice and you do lots of things. But when it comes to technology, children seem to be on that side of the house, whereas a parent is on that side of the house. So more togetherness and more talk and a little bit more shared things online, I think, is a definite plus for families.
Oh, fabulous. Well, I might move on to asking Maya a couple of questions there about communicating and having shared sort of family experiences with technology. You did lots of conversations with families in research for your book, as I understand it. What were some of the key sort of themes that came out of those discussions for you? I think you're muted there, Maya.
Here we are. Can you hear me now?
Yes, okay. We can. Fabulous.
All right. Thanks. All right. So in my book itself, the book focused on a very broad range of topics, right? Looked at parenting more broadly, but technology did come up a lot. And as Joe said, it's often a source of stress in families. One of the things that, just listening to Joe, one of the things that I would say to parents is when do you talk to kids about technology? One of the things that came up in interviews that I did for my book was a lot of parents would talk about being very reactive. Their kids would do something and they would react, and then there'd be a huge fight over how much gaming their son was doing, and their son would be aggressive, and it would kind of spiral. So I often tell parents that when you want to talk about technology, don't talk to them about their technology use when you're upset. If you walk into their room at 3 a.m. and instead of studying, your son is gaming, or instead of sleeping, he should be sleeping, obviously. That's not the time to have a huge argument with him. I think about and try to talk to him about gaming. It might be better to find a time when people are calm and then talk and actually ask questions, not just talk at the child, but try to listen to where the child is coming from. I mean, one of the things that, parents are always asking me about, the correlation between technology and mental health, the kids' usage of technology, and then depression, anxiety, aggression, all of these other things, attention deficit disorders. And what the research shows, which is really interesting, is that it's kind of contradictory research in a way, but the research generally shows that there's actually a very, very negligible, almost not worth worrying about, very small negative correlation between a child's technology use and mental health issues. And so one of the things that I think is interesting is for us to think about, we think technology is the issue, but often the way a child uses technology is actually more a symptom of some other underlying issue. And so maybe what a parent needs to do is, just like Joe was saying, really communicate more with the child and ask them about, how they're feeling about things, how they feel about their own relationship with technology, instead of talking at them all the time. So I'm going to give you an example. If you have a child who's gaming excessively and the parents are really worried, it may be less that gaming is the problem and more that the child has is already depressed or anxious about other things, and then they're retreating into this world of gaming as a way to deal with those other issues. So sometimes, parents think that it's just the tech that's the problem, but that masks something else that's going on underneath. So I'm just going to echo what Joe said. I think that really communication and that relationship building is really important. So if parents can spend more time talking to kids, listening to them, asking them questions about how they're feeling, that can be very, very useful.
Yeah, and building conversations about technology into their daily life and family life as well, and making sure to have those conversations regularly. Yes. What would you see as some of, if families are having sort of issues to do with technology or things like that, they're hoping that they can build healthier habits with technology, what do you think some of the sort of antidotes are, or ways to balance use of technology with, other forms of family life?
Yeah, so one of the things that came up in my research when I was interviewing parents for my book, I interviewed a number of parents in Singapore. And it was very interesting to see how little time kids spend outside. And then all the repercussions of that, right? There's a very high rate, something like, I can't remember the exact statistic, but well over 90% of teenagers in Singapore are myopic. And doctors think that's because they're not outside. They're not seeing, kind of horizons in the distance. And then there's, people trace the rise of ADHD and anxiety, depression, a lot of these different things to not having time outside. So one easy thing, I think, to balance a virtual world is to spend time outside. I used to say kids should have a green hour. Like an hour of time with fresh air and greenery every day if they can. So I think time outside is really important. And especially if kids are right now, many countries, kids are inside doing online school. I think just getting them outside is really important. Two, I think being able to spend some time with print books, like lower stimulation activities, can balance out the rapid visual stimulation that you get from screens and technology. So I was an English teacher. I'm a big fan of having kids read books in print still, because I think it slows things down. And the research shows that the way you read on a screen is very different from how you read on print. So when you're reading print, you are reading slower. You're processing a little bit deeper. And I think that's a good thing to encourage as well. Just a little bit of time every day. So those are some little strategies, but I think the biggest strategy is really communication. Just building relationships and communicating with your kids at times when everybody's calm, not just when things are reactive. Have conversations about technology when people are calm, not just in a reactive state.
Yes. Sounds like it's a key theme of the discussion is more communication within the family and with and about technology. Yeah. What do you see as some of the positive impacts of kids' use of technology? I know we often talk about safety concerns, and there's a lot of red flags to do with kids' technology. There's a lot of worry and stress about it. What would you see as some of the healthy ways that kids are using technology that we could perhaps lean into more?
Yeah, I think there's so much exciting stuff happening with technology today for kids, and it is the world that they're living in. So as parents, we don't want to demonize and vilify it. We want to encourage healthy kinds of technology use. So if kids are using technology, if they're creating things instead of just consuming, if they're creating, I think that's great, right? So kids who are creating movies or videos, or my son, for example, is 15 and he runs a football blog on Instagram, and he's figured out how do you bring more followers in? How do you kind of advertise and market a blog? I think all of those things are really exciting skills for kids, right, to learn in today's world. So
yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, I have a career in technology, so I didn't do much of an introduction at the start, but I'm a content creator. I am the creative director of a YouTube channel. And, my first interactions with technology was when I was 13, 14, developing websites and learning to market things, and have turned my use of technology into a career. And I think in the future, there will be a lot of careers around technology as well. So the more that kids can learn and develop those skills, the more they will be well set up for the careers of the future that involve not just content creation, but all careers will be interacting with technology in healthy ways, hopefully.
Yes, I totally agree, right? I think there's so much potential, and kids are doing exciting things today with technology. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Maya. Sun, I might turn over to ask you, tell us a little bit about the research that you did for your book and some of the key themes that came out of your interviews.
Right. I was motivated to write Transcendence Parenting, Raising Children in the Digital Age, after having done by then about 16 years of research on how families engage with and through technology. And there were so many threads that were running through my head across all of these years. And the reason I called it Transcendence Parenting is because the growing intensification of technology use, the growing linkages between parents and children over mobile, over online, and so on, made parents feel like they had to parent all the time. And so they've got to transcend all times of the day to be parents, whether their kids are next to them or whether they are in school. They never seem to stop parenting. And at the same time, because children's social lives have become so complex, they are socializing face to face, but they're also socializing in various online spaces. Parents also have to learn to transcend these physical and online spaces in order to help guide their children and to understand who they are meeting, what kinds of influences they are being exposed to, and so on. And so for me, the whole business of the intensification of technology use has really changed the parent-child communication conversation. And I totally hear what Maya and Joanne have been saying about the need for communication. And in my research, I found the emergence of some really troubling new forms of communication around homeschool conferencing. And that's really when, for example, schools are communicating with parents about the child's academic performance. And you're seeing with the rise of COVID-19, there's a growing use of technology platforms for learning. These technology platforms can be very useful, but they also tend to quantify a child's performance in some very stark metrics. And I saw in my research that there were some relationships which were marred by this because the parents would look at the metrics and then hold the child accountable and use the metrics to have very tough conversations with the child, like why is the performance this week poorer than last week, and so on. And it led to, in some situations, an over-involvement by the parent in the child's learning, and that diminished the child's opportunity to engage in their own problem solving, as well as to advocate for themselves in the classroom because their parents were busy doing it for them. And so this to me was a rather unhealthy manifestation of the technologization of parent-child communication.
And what are some of the ways that parents can sort of deal with those situations better? Because I think with COVID, we've been doing a lot of at-home schooling of our kids, and we will continue to get more data from schools. This is how they did on that assessment. This happened in a social interaction today. With parents being given all of this information, should they feel like they need to respond to it? Or what are some other ways that we can have healthy relationships with all of that information that's coming to us as parents?
Right. So I think it's important not to look at your child as a basket of statistics. It's important to view your child in their totality as, individuals with various facets to them, and not to just zero in on these kinds of very stark indicators of their performance. And obviously, on the one hand, you might have a child who's not really striving at math, but is fantastic at building an Instagram account that, captures all aspects of his or her hobby, right? So that also tells you about where your child might have different kinds of gifts or different kinds of strengths that you need or want to support. And so it's really good to set everything in context and not to want to sweep in and take over and, want to reorder your child's life based on the kind of data that you're receiving.
One of the op-eds that I know you've authored is about parental involvement also in parent-to-parent communications. So not just in terms of getting involved in the kid's life through the school or through information about the child, but communicating with other parents about how their kids are going or conflicts they might be having. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've discovered there and some of the things to be aware of with our use of technology as parents?
Yes, I know parents' WhatsApp chat groups or Facebook chat groups are like such a lifesaver, right? When you're missing that important piece of spelling list, or when you don't know whether tomorrow you're supposed to turn up in your PE kit, the WhatsApp chat is such a salvation. But at the same time, in my research, I found parents actually becoming too involved in their children's social lives. And sometimes little squabbles that happened between children in playgrounds would be escalated by parents in the parents' chat. And it was fascinating because you would see the parents in the parents' chat taking sides, some of them even screenshotting the WhatsApp chats as evidence for future reference. And it escalated a lot of childhood squabbles unnecessarily. And at the same time, it also meant that the child did not know how to solve these problems on their own and did not know how to best perform in these social situations. They couldn't develop their own cues and they couldn't develop their sense of autonomy. So again, I think parents need to know that they should take a step back. Just because we can get involved doesn't mean that we should. And we need to give the children some room to grow on their own independently. Otherwise, you basically create a very unhealthy long-term relationship of overdependence on you. And I don't think that's something that, parents want.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how much monitoring should we be doing of kids' technology use? So in terms of needing to take a step back from all of the inputs we have about how they're going, and take a step back from getting involved in, any squabbles they might have, with a view to we still want them to be safe in their use of technology. What do you think is an appropriate amount, or what are some ways in which parents can feel confident in monitoring their kids' use of technology, but not stepping over that line?
I think it goes back to what my esteemed fellow panelists have been talking about, which is really to maintain that level of communication. And I think the technology conversation is just a part of it. Whereas on the one hand, some parents want to monitor their kids so that they know how their children are doing. If you've got already a relationship that is tense, and you want to monitor the technology use, it's only going to make the relationship even more fraught and hostile. But if you've already got a healthy, open relationship and you say, would you mind if sometimes I just have a look just to make sure that you're, mixing with the right company or that you're not being unnecessarily exposed to harmful content, then I think the child will be much more open and receptive to these kinds of parental involvement. So it shouldn't be technology that's wagging the dog. It should be a healthy relationship from which you then talk about technology as one component of your parental guidance.
Yeah. So it sounds like a key theme from all three of you has been building that communication and building trust with your child so that you can have those conversations and talk about technology before that develops. I might throw to the three of you, if that's the number one thing that parents need to be really focusing on, perhaps you could give us some sort of practical advice on how to have those conversations, or like how should we be embarking on building that trusting relationship and having that communication? If we were to go home today and have that conversation, what does that look like? Jo?
Yeah, I think double standards could be a big issue here, and it is a big issue. If you as a parent are saying you're spending too much time on your phone or too much time on a screen, yet you yourself are walking around the house always with your phone, you move to the kitchen, your phone goes with you move to the sofa, your phone goes with you, yet you're telling your child they have unhealthy screen relationships. then that's double standards and it's mixed messages. I think we really need to remember we often focus on the child and their use of technology, but we as parents are their first role model. You might have a 15 or 16-year-old and you think, well, they're not really watching what I'm doing. Well, they are. They're watching every move that you make. And they will say something that is a mixed message. If you're telling them one thing, yet you're doing the other. Now, I don't mean that we necessarily have to do exactly the same rules we give to our children around technology use, but the way we use it should reflect the kinds of approaches that we're expecting our children to take as well. So not double standards or mixed messages, but the same message for the whole family.
Fabulous. And Maya, what would some of your practical advice be to parents on building that trusting relationship?
So I think one of the things that as parents we tend not to do, and I'm guilty of this as well, parents tend to talk at kids a lot, but I think as a teacher, I realize that our tweens, our teenagers, they are actually really thoughtful and they're thinking about a lot of stuff related to technology as well. So what I would encourage parents to do is to ask their kids questions. Ask about, what really excites you about your digital life? How does it help you stay connected to your friends? What are the things that make you feel good when you're on a screen? And what are the things that make you feel kind of depleted? Or how can you regulate things better yourself? But kind of asking kids those questions and seeing what they think, their perspective, because it is different from ours, which tends to come from anxiety. And theirs is coming from, this is the world I live in and I'm trying all these different things. So I think I would encourage parents, like I said, to have these conversations, not when they're upset, but when they can actually listen to their child, ask questions and listen and see what your child has to say, because, they are growing up, they're a different generation growing up in a different time, and you want to hear from them as well, not just talk at them.
Terrific. And Sun, what about you? Do you have any practical advice on communication or building trust with your kids?
Absolutely. So I like the Maya and Joanne. I also have 2 kids, and absolutely get them to be your teacher. I think many parents make the mistake of saying that, technology is just, a kid's thing. And, you use it for business and professional purposes. But if you think about your family, if you've got a parents and kids WhatsApp chat and you're sharing all kinds of fun stuff, the moment they come home, you've got that conversation departure point. Then you can immediately lubricate that relationship with your kids. And at the same time, when it comes to Instagram, I get all kinds of very useful tips from my kids about how I should position myself, how I should use a new filter, and so on. And in the process, it builds that richness of that relationship, and you have shared moments where you laugh about and so on. And those are really critical ingredients for making that family communication so much more amiable and so much more enriching.
Fantastic. We've got about 10 minutes to go here, so I have a few more questions I'd love to dive through. But if there's anyone in the chat who'd like to ask a specific question to one of our panelists, please go ahead and put that in the Q&A, and we'll try and call some of those out here to ask our panelists. So one thing I would like to ask all of you, we've talked a lot about communication and trust and safety with kids' use of technology. Every family has different rules around technology, some good, some bad. What would you say is your, number 1 or 2 rules around use of technology that you do think are important to have in families, that it's safe and okay for parents to be talking to their kids about rules around technology? Jo?
I think there definitely needs to be time in a family home when everyone is off their device. It could be, when you're out shopping or in the car or at dinner, but a time when you actually can talk to your child without the device, and a time when they can talk to you without your device, because I find it gets interrupted. It interrupts the conversation. And a second thing about the rules is rules need to keep changing around technology. I've been into family homes where the 14-year-old has the same rule as the 8-year-old. Now, that doesn't make sense because they're quite different users. So there can't be this one rule for all your children and you just keep that in place. Children's technology use changes as they get older, changes when it's in school holidays, changes when it's COVID time. So you have to have this kind of work in progress approach to your rules to make sure that they align with the needs of the family, with the ways your children is using it, your expectations for healthy technology use. That way they will stick to the rules as opposed to not sticking with unreasonable rules.
Maya, what about you?
So I totally agree with Joanne. I think meal times, I would really encourage parents to say, having one family meal without technology, and then the parents have to model that too, so nobody brings their phones to the table. That I think is wonderful. I do also, there's a lot of research on the ways in which cell phones disrupt sleep. And so I would say that taking a cell phone away at night from a child, so when the child goes to sleep, they put their cell phone in another room. That to me seems reasonable, because kids don't need cell phones for schoolwork. They may need their laptops, but they don't need cell phones. And so, I know this could be a hugely fraught issue, but I would say if parents can take cell phones at night and so that the child can sleep, that's a good thing. But I do know that, teenagers spend a lot of time up at night. And that's par for the course. That is how, they're doing schoolwork, they're connecting socially. That's something parents worry about, but that's also fairly normal for kids to be up at night. But yeah, I would take cell phones away if possible.
And Sun, what about you?
So talking about rules, my son was the last in his elementary school class to have a phone. And he was the last man standing, literally. Everyone else had a phone. And he would say to me, if you only didn't do this kind of research, I would have a phone. But because you put it in topic, I don't have one. But one thing about, for me and rules, it is really to explain them. I think earlier Maya mentioned that children are actually very thoughtful. And I think when I explain to my children why I have particular rules and why these rules are for their mental well-being and for the family's well-being in general, my children are actually very reasonable and amenable to it. And over time, as they grew older, they just knew to adapt their own technology use because of these reasons. And I didn't have to really impose very hard or very tough rules on them simply because they understood the principles that underpinned all of these rules.
Fantastic. We've had a question from one of our participants. Michelle would like to know, are there any examples of restrictive parents who have done a disservice to their kids through technology restrictions? So if we are sort of taking technology away, are there any examples of where that might be more harmful rather than helpful?
Yeah, the example I gave earlier with children pulling back and not telling their parents. But we also have to remember that children are very resourceful. You probably remember when you were a teenager and the kind of measures that you went against rules that you felt were unfair. So if you're doing things like taking the phone away for a reason that's not a technology-related behaviour, children can still use their friend's phone, they can still use their laptop, they can use their iPad. So you're taking away one device, but there's often multiple devices that they have access to. And if they haven't, taking away their phone, you remember you're actually cutting, if it's a teenager particularly, you're cutting off every aspect of their social life as well, because children today, when I was a child, we'd go to the mall and I'd hang out with my friends there or go to the park. Well, children don't really do that so much. They hang out online. They might hang out together in a video game or hang out on social media together. That's their way of going to the mall together. So if you're taking their device away from them, you're cutting all their social relationships as well outside of school. So you really need to think, is that the best punishment for them, or is there another way you can still get the message home to them that doesn't completely cut off all their social? Because it really is really important for teenagers to have those social connections if it's just a minor thing, that you're punishing them for.
And is there anything that families can do to share in technology together? For example, I've heard some families do sort of WhatsApp groups within the family, things like that, or they might have shared social media accounts. What are your thoughts on families interacting with social media together, and what would be the best ways to approach that, Sun?
So I've seen some families have a lot of fun with all the TikTok dance videos, because what it means is that the whole family has to practice and rehearse together. And then when they put it up and they share it and they get comments and they get, likes, they feel so encouraged. And it's like a team effort, and you've got crossed this milestone together. And in the midst of it, you've had lots of fun and lots of laughter and some physical activity. So honestly, what's not to like?
Fantastic. I can see there's another question. Why aren't schools playing their part in teaching kids to be responsible digital citizens? They're woefully behind in the tech social media curve. Does the panel agree that schools should include responsible use of tech as part of the curriculum? Maya, I might throw that one over to you as a...
Yeah, and I think, I think it's hard to generalize about schools, because there are some schools that are doing, that are trying, but certainly it's an area that schools need to look at very, very carefully. I think having a curriculum all the way from the time when kids are very young through high school, and the curriculum obviously adapts and changes as kids grow up, but having kids look at issues of safety online, that's huge. That's really important. Look at issues around plagiarizing and all different issues related to digital safety, and having conversations with kids about how do they self-regulate their own use. These are all really important things, and I think schools need to look at them, create a curriculum. There are schools that are doing that very successfully, but certainly it should be done across schools. And I think teachers need a lot of training as well. I mean, one thing that this whole pandemic has thrown up is just how much more training we need for teachers to have them be able to immerse themselves in a digital world with their kids as well.
So I think to wrap things up here today, because we've just got a couple of minutes left, I might ask if the participants were to go away today with one thing that they could do with their family. So when they go home and have a conversation with their kids tonight, communication, building trust, those sorts of have been key themes from this discussion. What's one practical thing I might ask each of you that our participants could go and can go and talk to their kids about to help build healthy technology habits? Jo?
Okay, I'm going to give two. Okay, one is I have a Spotify account with my children, and that is brilliant. We just share music, and it's just opened up a whole new interest for the family. So it's great. So that's a positive. On the other side, if you need to talk to your children about a safety issue, rather than confronting them and saying, I heard you did this, children can feel quite challenged by that. I think a softer way to do it, and a much more effective way, is to find something in the media, an article or a story about something that's happened to, in a similar vein to what you want to talk about. It might be a cyber safety issue or cyber bullying issue, and use that as a way of starting the conversation. Much less confronting. You can talk about the article, get their opinion on the article, and lead the discussion into talking about the child and their technology use. It's a much more successful way of doing it.
Yeah, great tip. What about you, Maya? What's your top tip to go away with?
I really like what Joanne said, right? Using these teaching moments and finding other stimuli that you can use to start a conversation. That's great. I think for me, one of the things that I would encourage parents to do is look for the positive as well. So if there are ways in which your children are using technology positively, like you said, Shannon, you create content. If your kids are creating things that are exciting, if they are doing, anything where they're creative or where they are consuming really interesting educational content, ask them what they're proud of, and then celebrate that, encourage that, so that they realize that, look, healthy technology use can be really good for them, and so that they don't always feel like it's just a problem, but it can also be something exciting and something we celebrate.
Fantastic. And what about you, Sun?
So very quickly, I'll underline what I said earlier, which is get your kids to teach you about technology. They'll feel a sense of accomplishment, and you'll learn a thing or two. And in the process, you'll be sharing all these moments where there'll be this great, transmission of knowledge as well as insights. And you get to also understand more about each other. And that's so valuable.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you very much to all of our panelists today. We are out of time, sadly, but thank you very much for your time and your expertise. And I think that the key themes that came out of today were very much try and enjoy technology with your kids and communicate in ways when we're all feeling sort of calm and engaged as a family. And then look at the positives as well, and try and lean into the healthy ways that technology is enriching all of our family lives. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, participants, for coming along, and we'll leave it there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Shannon. Thank you, everybody.